at the kids' table. That's where they put me in one of the most luxurious mansions in Beverly Hills. Me, a 35-year-old guy, the CEO of a tech company worth billions, sitting between two boys who wouldn't stop playing Minecraft on their phones. On the other side of the hall, my wife Madison was smiling elegantly at the main table, surrounded by her traditional family and influential friends. I took in the flower arrangements that cost more than a budget car, and the silver cutlery sparkling under the century-old chandelier crystals. The butler had just served the first course when I noticed Aunt Emma giving me pitying looks. At that moment, something inside me snapped. 3 years of marriage and a decade of building my empire boiled down to this: having a spot at the kids' table in the Harrison mansion. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. The vibe in that mansion always felt stifling to me. The very first time I walked in, I felt the weight of the Harrisons' tradition in every piece of art and every ancestral portrait hanging on the walls. Thomas, my father-in-law, made a point of recounting the history of every single piece of furniture whenever he had visitors, as if every chair was a living testament to his century-old legacy. Catherine, my mother-in-law, moves through the hallways like a queen in her castle, directing the staff with the precision of a maestro. Her gaze is always sizing me up, as if searching for any flaws in my posture, the way I handle the silverware, or even the words I choose. Nathan, Madison's brother, is even worse. As the direct heir to the family business, he makes it crystal clear that his fortune has a history, unlike mine, which he dismissively calls new money. His subtle jabs at new rich guys always get a restrained laugh from the guests. Only Aunt Emma seems real. She too married someone outside their social circle and totally understands what it means to be an outsider in this world. Her sympathetic smiles are like little breaks of relief in the middle of this social drama. Tonight's dinner was Thomas's 60th birthday. The mansion looked even more imposing, decked out with floral arrangements flown directly from Holland. The guests were the crème de la crème of local society, impeccably dressed and part of a club that I'd apparently never be allowed into. And there I was, sitting at this distant table among kids busy with their gadgets, realizing that this might just be the moment everything changes. No one openly questioned it when I left the kids' table. The two boys didn't even notice me leaving. They were too absorbed in their games. I strolled down a side corridor of the hall, passing old family photos of the Harrisons. Generations of stern faces seemed to watch me as if they too disapproved of my presence. I paused for a moment in the library, my usual hideout during these endless events. There, among shelves of leather-bound books that no one really read, I used to take refuge when the weight of all the unspoken criticisms became too much. It was in that same spot that, 2 years ago, I accidentally overheard Catherine telling her friends how interesting it was watching the new money try to adapt to traditional customs. My phone started buzzing. Messages from Madison. "Where are you? Why'd you leave the table? Dad's about to give the main speech. You're being childish." Then came messages from Nathan. "Man, don't make a scene. Madison is embarrassed. Act your age." I looked out the window in the library at the meticulously kept gardens. I remembered the day I met Madison at a tech conference. She was there representing her family's investments, and I was pitching my then-emerging company. We fell in love quickly, and for a while, I thought love was enough to break down all the social barriers. But reality turned out very differently. Every dinner, every social event, every family holiday was dotted with little humiliations. Comments about my quirky habits, fake surprise when I showed off my knowledge of wine or art, conversations that subtly reminded me I didn't truly belong. And now, at this crucial moment, I realize I can't keep pretending everything is okay. Sitting at the kids' table wasn't just about where I sat. It was a symbol of how this family sees me and will always see me, no matter how successful I become or how rich I get. I decided to leave, not in a dramatic way, with confrontations or scandals. I just grabbed my jacket and headed for the front door. The butler watched me with an expression mixing understanding and pity. He'd probably seen this scene before. The sound of my footsteps at the mansion's entrance must have alerted Thomas. Before I reached my car, I heard his authoritative voice. "Where do you think you're going, Christopher?" I turned around and saw the whole family gathered at the front door. Madison, Catherine, Nathan, and some curious guests watching the scene. "You know, Thomas, I spent years trying to figure out my place in this family. Today I finally figured it out. At the kids' table," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. Madison stepped forward a few paces, her silk dress whispering against the marble floor. "Chris, you're overreacting. It was just about space at the head table. Her voice wavered slightly, torn between her loyalty to her family and our marriage. No, Madison. It was about making it clear where I stand in this family hierarchy. It's always been like this. When I launched my company at 25, you called it an interesting project. When I hit my first billion, it was dismissed as beginner's luck. And when we got married, it was all about the new rich who managed to win over the Harrison princess. Catherine cleared her throat, adjusting her pearl necklace. Christopher, dear, you're being melodramatic. We're a traditional family. We have our customs. Customs? I laughed without humor. Like always asking about my humble beginnings at dinner? Or correcting my French pronunciation in front of everyone? Nathan stepped forward, with an arrogant look barely concealed. You never really understood our world, Christopher. Some things just can't be bought with money. You're right, Nathan. Respect can't be bought. And that's exactly why I'm leaving. I turned to Madison, who was stuck between her family and me. For 3 years, I waited for you to stand up for me, to see how your family treated me. But you always stayed silent. Tonight, at the kids' table, I finally realized that you see me, just like they do. The silence that followed was deafening. Aunt Emma, the only one who kept her distance from the whole scene, gave me a look of deep understanding. I got in my car and drove off, leaving behind the weight of years of unspoken humiliations and leaving Madison with her choices. That first night away from home was surreal. Instead of going back to our mansion in Bel Air, I drove to my old downtown apartment, the one I'd kept as an office after the wedding. The messages just kept coming. Madison's texts alternated between desperate pleas and accusations. Please come back. We can talk about it. You're being unfair. I can't believe you humiliated my family like that. Call me when you've calmed down. Lying on the office sofa, I began replaying every moment from the past few years. I remembered the first time I noticed the pattern, during a Thanksgiving dinner when Thomas made sure to recount to the guests how I started from nothing. His tone was laced with a barely hidden condescension, as if my story was some exotic curiosity to entertain his friends. Catherine had her own ways of showing disapproval. Little comments about my wardrobe, unsolicited advice about etiquette, disapproving looks whenever I talked about business at dinner. Darling, some topics just aren't dinner conversation, she'd say, all while Nathan was busy bragging about his business deals. And Madison always tried to play both sides. In public, she'd smile and change the subject when her family put me down. In private, she'd ask me to understand, to be patient, and not to take it all so seriously. They just need time to adjust, she'd repeat like a mantra. 3 years went by, and nothing changed. At 3 in the morning, I got a message from Aunt Emma. You did what many of us wished we had done. Don't blame yourself. Sometimes it takes a storm to clear the air. I spent the rest of the night replaying every moment when I swallowed my pride. Every time I pretended not to notice their jokes. Every occasion when I smiled politely while being treated like a curiosity, an outsider accepted only because of the money I made. In the morning, Madison's messages had a different tone. I talked to Mom and Dad. They admit they might have been a bit harsh sometimes. We can try again, starting fresh. They promised to make an effort, but it wasn't about empty promises or superficial gestures anymore. It was about respect, dignity, and being treated as an equal. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I spent the day sorting out my thoughts, trying to figure out how I'd let this go on for so long. Later that afternoon, Nathan sent a text. Look, maybe we went too far sometimes, but you've got to see it from our side too. We have traditions, a reputation to keep up. Traditions, reputation. Words that had slowly become code for prejudice and subtle discrimination. I realized it wasn't just about the kids' table. It was about years of small insults, fake smiles, and insincere tolerance. It was about Madison repeatedly choosing silence over the truth. I turned off my phone and stared out the window of my office at the city below, where ordinary people went about their lives, not caring about family lineages or century-old traditions. Somewhere in that crowd was the person I used to be, before I tried to fit into a world that would never truly accept me. 3 days went by without me going back home. Every morning, I saw things in my marriage from a new perspective. I remembered the beginning, when Madison and I first met at that conference. She was genuinely interested in my ideas, in the excitement I had for creating something new. Back then, our social differences had seemed completely irrelevant. In my office, while reviewing contracts and leading online meetings, I realized I had lost part of who I was trying to meet the Harrison standards. I noticed how I'd changed the way I dressed, talked, even walked, all in an effort to fit a mold that wasn't meant for me. Then, on the fourth night, I got an unexpected call from Madison. We need to talk, not over the phone. I agreed to meet her in the park where we used to walk in the early days of our relationship. When I arrived, I found her sitting on our usual bench, no longer holding that perfect posture. She looked tired, vulnerable. "I've spent these days thinking a lot," she began. "I talked with Aunt Emma. She helped me see things I'd been purposely ignoring." I sat down beside her at a respectful distance while the late afternoon sun cast long shadows on the lawn. "You know what scares me the most, Chris? I realized I was starting to become like them. When they put you at the kids' table, part of me thought it was normal. Like, as if you truly didn't deserve the head table." Her words stung, but I appreciated the honesty. "I talked to my parents yesterday," she continued. "It was the first time I actually stood up to them. I told them the way they treat you is unacceptable. Dad got furious, and Mom started with her usual excuses about tradition and appearances." "And how did that make you feel?" I asked. "Free, scared, guilty for not doing it sooner. They even threatened to disown me, can you believe that? As if that threat still meant anything," she said. I stayed quiet, letting her speak. "I realized I spent so long trying to please my family that I forgot to stand up for our marriage. Every time they put you down and I stayed silent, it was like I was also hurting you." The wind rustled through the tree leaves around us. A couple ran past on the park path, completely oblivious to our moment of revelation. "I can't promise my family will change," Madison said after a long pause. "Honestly, I doubt they ever will, but I can promise that I have. I'm not going to be quiet anymore. I'm going to defend our marriage, even if that means stepping away from them." I looked at her, searching for the Madison I had known before society and family pressures changed her. "I'm not asking you to come back right now," she continued. "I know I need to prove this with actions, not just words. I just want you to know that I'm ready to fight for us, this time on the right side of things." I got up from the bench, feeling the weight of the past few weeks on my shoulders. "I need some time, Madison. I need to be sure that this change is real, not just a reaction to the moment." She nodded, understanding. As I turned to leave, her voice reached out. "I'll wait as long as it takes, Chris. This time, I'm truly doing what's right." Getting back to normal after that conversation in the park wasn't easy. Back at the office, I buried myself in work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Madison and our issues. The tug of war between my love for her and my self-respect grew stronger every day. A week later, Aunt Emma called. "Madison is really changing, Christopher. Yesterday, she stood up to Nathan during a family lunch. He made a comment about her new money, and she just got up and left, leaving Catherine in the middle of one of her famous afternoon teas. These small acts of defiance gave me hope, but also made me wonder how long this new attitude would last. Would Madison keep up that strength when the pressure increased? When the threat of being disowned became real? On a particularly hard afternoon, I found an old photo of us on my phone. It was from our first trip together, before her family entered the picture. We were at a simple restaurant in San Francisco, smiling, completely in love, and unaware of what lay ahead. Madison was wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt, so different from the polished image her family expected her to maintain. Her texts kept coming, but now they were different. They weren't desperate pleas or excuses. "I had lunch by myself today at our favorite cafe. I started therapy. I have a lot to work through. I canceled the Harrison charity dinner. I can't keep pretending that everything's okay." Each message showed the real Madison, the woman I met at that conference who wasn't afraid to be herself. Nathan tried contacting me several times. "Madison is out of control. Our family is falling apart because of you. You don't understand the weight of generations of tradition." I ignored every one of them. The tradition he so valued was the same thing that justified prejudice and subtle discrimination. The weight of past generations was crushing any hope for a fair future. In my lonely moments, I wondered if I was being too hard on myself, if I should just accept the family's apologies and try again. But then I remembered the kids' table, the condescending smiles, and the snide remarks hidden as concern. 2 weeks after our park conversation, I got an unexpected message from Catherine. "Christopher, can we talk? Just the two of us." I was tempted to ignore it, but something in her tone felt different. I replied that I needed more time. She answered, "I understand. When you're ready, I'll be here." Madison made us see things we'd rather ignore. The hardest part was sleeping alone in my apartment, missing Madison, but knowing we needed this time apart. She had to figure out who she really was without her family always hovering. I needed to get back my self-esteem and my dignity. Sometimes, while driving past our Bel Air home, I'd see the lights on and imagine Madison inside, fighting her own battles. Part of me wanted to rush back to her, but the wiser part knew that sometimes you have to let things break completely before you can rebuild stronger and truer. 1 month passed since that incident at the mansion. Madison kept her word, and her actions started to show real change. I heard from Aunt Emma that she moved into her own apartment, stepping away from her family's constant influence. That decision set off a scandal in the Harrison social circle. During a business meeting, I unexpectedly ran into Thomas. He looked like he'd aged years in just a few weeks. In the elevator, he tried to make small talk. Madison never challenged us until you came along. Maybe that's exactly the problem, Thomas, I replied, my eyes fixed on the elevator numbers. Later, at home, I replayed that brief encounter in my mind over and over. The way Thomas spoke revealed more about him than any fight we'd ever had. For him, the issue wasn't how they treated me. It was that his daughter finally found her own voice. Madison pressed on with her journey of self-discovery. Her messages reflected a gradual shift. I took part in a charity event today. Not one of those high society ones, but a real project in a struggling neighborhood. I started working with a startup. I want to build something just for myself. I now realize how much time I wasted trying to be the perfect Harrison daughter. Catherine tried to intervene once again, this time through mutual friends. She's hurting Christopher. We all are. Our family will never be the same. We can start over and be different. But it wasn't about them anymore. It was about Madison finding her own identity, me reclaiming my dignity, and both of us building something real, if that was still possible. Surprisingly, Nathan was the next one to show a change in perspective. In a short email, he wrote, "Maybe I was an idiot. Madison is happier now, even away from us. That speaks volumes." In my therapy sessions, I started to understand that the issue was never really about old money versus new money, or tradition versus modernity. It was about power, control, and the inability to accept change. One afternoon, I got a call from Aunt Emma. Madison sold all her shares in the family companies. She said she wants to make her own way. Thomas is devastated, but Catherine is even starting to question a few things. Sitting in my office, looking out over the city that saw me grow and build my own success, I realized that sometimes you've got to lose everything to find your true self. Madison was losing her family, but finding herself. I had temporarily lost my marriage, but I'd regained my self-respect. The sun was setting when I got one last text from Madison that day. "Today, I finally understood what you went through all these years." I was at a dinner at the Watsons and felt completely out of place. For the first time, I experienced what it's like to be the outsider. "I'm sorry I didn't get it sooner." I put my phone down without replying. Some realizations need time to sink in. Some transformations take time to really set. And sometimes, a story has to be completely rewritten to have a chance at a new ending. We'd been apart for 2 months when Madison invited me out for coffee. She chose a simple cafe downtown, far from the fancy spots we used to go to. She looked different. Shorter hair, casual clothes, and authenticity I hadn't seen in ages. "I sold my Porsche," she said as soon as she sat down. "I bought a more modest car. Mom nearly had a heart attack when she found out." I smiled lightly, remembering how Catherine always insisted that appearances were everything. "You know, Chris, I spent these months deconstructing everything I thought I knew about life, family, and love. It was terrifying to see how much of me was just a reflection of what they expected me to be." She stirred her black coffee. No longer the almond milk cappuccino her mom insisted was more ladylike. "Aunt Emma told me that you ran into Thomas," she continued. "He still doesn't get it. Maybe he never will. But I'm not living just for his approval anymore." "And how do you feel about that?" I asked. "Free, scared, sometimes lonely, but I finally feel real." She paused. "I started working on a social project downtown. I'm using my finance skills to help small entrepreneurs. It's more rewarding than any of those Harrison charity events all put together." I watched her as she spoke, noticing how her eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. This was the Madison I'd known years ago, before her family's expectations smothered her. "I still love you, Chris," she said softly. "But now I know I had to find myself first before I could really be the partner you deserve." We sat there in silence for a moment, letting the background noise of the cafe fill the space between us. Outside, the city kept on with its frantic pace, completely unaware of the transformation we were both going through. "I love you too, Madison," I finally said. "But you're right. Some things have to be built on a more solid foundation." Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this.